I'm thrilled to be joined here by Clay Nelson to talk about the topic of equestrian facility and barn design. And Clay is quite literally the expert on this topic. And I'm excited to jump into your background, Clay. But before we do so, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Absolutely. Well, let's learn a bit about you. I would love for you to kind of kick it off by telling us kind of what is your background, what's your story, and kind of how did you go? You went from environmental chemist to equestrian facility designer. Wow, words. Tell us about that.
Sure. I grew up just outside of Atlanta. I did not grow up around horses, but I was fortunate to live in a wonderful family where we liked to go hunting and fishing and just be outdoors growing up. So that's where I developed my love for nature, so to speak. And then fast forward to graduate school, and that was I went to the Nicholas School of the Environment at Duke. So this would have been 2006 to 2008 timeframe. And that was when I was first introduced to horses, studying to be an environmental chemist, and kind of had the crazy idea. Sustainability was a big buzzword at the time, lead design, etc. So kind of had the crazy idea of let's try applying some of these concepts of good land stewardship, sustainability, etc., to equestrian properties. Um, so that's how this all started, so to speak. Sustainable Stables as a business originally was just a website for information. Wrote blogs, etc., on topics related to you know good land stewardship, sustainability around horse keeping, and had a few folks reach out to me with some questions about some topics I had written, and a lot of them started with, "We just bought some land, or we're looking to make some changes to our property. What do you think about this?" And that's kind of when the light bulb went off of want to turn this into an actual business. Getting involved with planning and design of properties really made sense because, after all, it's a lot better to prevent a problem from happening in the first place that you have to find a solution to than it is to fix a problem once it arises. Um, that being said, my background was in environmental health and chemistry. I was just started what I thought was going to be my forever career with the U.S. EPA as a soils chemist, um, but had quite a bit of student loan debt at the time. So this was a nice way to, side hustle is not the sexiest way to describe it, but for a while it was kind of a side hustle, and and but slowly grew over the years. And then in 2019, I fell in love with a Texan and said, "Will you marry me?" And yes, I will leave my what I thought was going to be forever job with the EPA in North Carolina and move to Texas. And that's when Sustainable Stables really transitioned to more of a full time business. So that's kind of how we got here today. A lot of what I did was slow, experiential learning is the best kind of learning. So 17 years later, I feel like I know most of what I want to ultimately know. But I mean, even hundreds of projects later, uh, I have yet to have a project where I feel like I know the answer to every single question. And that will probably be true today as well with some of the questions we get. But
Yeah, well, I mean that keeps it interesting, right?
absolutely.
Um, So you've been doing I mean, first of all, the equestrian world is so lucky to have you. You
Well,
have such
thank
an
you.
incredible expertise, and applying that to equine facility design is such a cool, application of your education. So really, really excited to be able to chat with you on that and on that tonight. Um, Jumping into kind of designing with science in mind, how has your background in environmental science and soil chemistry shaped the way you approach farm and barn design?
Sure. You might think, what does being an environmental chemist have to do with equestrian land planning? But um, just to give you a few examples, as a soil chemist, I spent many days in the lab sieving soil down to certain particle size fractions to understand if a child's playing in the dirt, what particle size adheres to a child's hand that they might then put in their mouth and be exposed to. Now I ask for a sieve analysis when I'm looking at footing from a quarry. It's the exact same thing, exact same information, just being applied a little bit differently. Um, probably there, there's a good chance that you and maybe a lot of the listeners had a chemistry teacher in high school or undergrad who liked to say chemistry is everywhere. Um, but it's true. Whether it's being applied to human exposure to toxic metals or to what is a good type of sand footing for my arena, there's a lot of overlap there. Also, we'd measure concentrations of elements in soil. Um, at EPA, I was looking at the bad stuff that you didn't want in your soil. Now I'm looking at nutrients in soil to understand, pasture management. So that's another example of really understanding on a technical level the data, the uncertainty about the data, how to interpret it correctly. It's just a new application. And before grad school, I worked for a small engineering firm where we did property condition assessments, we did septic design. So those are a lot of things that are still applicable today when it comes to designing equestrian facilities. So there's just a handful of examples.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, and the other thing is, there's a lot of anecdotal stories about what makes for good equestrian layout and design as a scientist by training. To the extent we're able to, I try to be informed by what the science says. And there is a lot of good research out there, not as much as I would want, but try to, make decisions based off of science and not just someone's opinion or one person's, anecdotal experience.
Yeah. And has your work been so are you based in Texas right now?
I am.
And has your work been geographically like specific and is it discipline specific?
So it is. The answer is no to both of those. That being said, we're fortunate. It's a small boutique company. It's myself and this a year ago I brought on a partner. From 2008 to 2019, I was in North Carolina, and so that's still have a lot of projects from that area because a lot of our business comes from word of mouth. Over the years, we designed someone's property, they have a friend said, "Oh, who did this?" and that's where a lot of our business comes from. Um, but we've done projects somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 states. We've got projects right now in Florida, in Tennessee, in Kansas. Um, haven't done Alaska or Hawaii yet. We've done all up and down the West Coast from California to Washington, and most every geographical region of the country.
Okay, and then disciplines, are you like you can work with any sort of sport horses, race horses? Are you specific at all?
I am not. Yeah, I'm much more of a generalist, and that is applied to both discipline, and it's also really important for me. Um, there's some of our clients have more money than I will ever dream of having, and some of them are operating on a very limited budget, and it's important to us that we are able to provide, uh, you know, cost-effective services to all types of clientele, whether that's discipline, budget, geographic region, etc.
Okay. Makes perfect sense. And then Clay, so when you work in these different, you worked in a number of different states, but when you are picking up a project in a similar location to a prior project, are you still starting from scratch, even if it's like down the road? Is it still having to kind of run all the same tests? Or can you be pretty certain that if the farm is in Ocala or like within a certain area, that you kind of know the answer to certain questions going in?
Um, so I would say our process is pretty consistent. And over the years it's been refined. That being said, I can't think of any part of the information gathering that we do when we're doing planning and design that we would skip because we did someone's project down the road. It just brings to mind my understanding is, particularly in Kentucky and racehorse country, part of the reason that racehorse capital is because of the soil chemistry there and the the limestone. Um, but interestingly, one farm might have very good soil chemistry, and their neighbors might not be so good. So just because you're just down the road from someone else does not mean that what's true for that one property is true for another.
Yeah. Do you have people ever like bring you in before they purchase a property to be like, "Can you tell me if this is gonna be good for horses?"
Yeah, so we do offer pre-purchase consultations. That it's honestly, I think probably the most valuable service that we provide, and probably the least utilized. Um, but it's it's very valuable. It's the very important that I'm honest with my information, and when someone's got their eye on a certain property and their heart on a certain property, um, I want to be able to tell them yes, move forward. And that's not always the case. It Finding the right property is incredibly important, and there's a balance between going in blind and just hoping it's the right property, and kind of information overload or analysis paralysis, for lack of a better word, because I'm just reminded of a conversation. We were doing this for a property in the Bay Area of California, with the real estate agent was on one of the calls, and we were describing what's the ideal property. And they said, I don't know if you've been to the Bay Area, but what you've just described is what all the wineries are looking for, and they're buying up all that land and wanting to pay more than most horse owners wants to. So um,
Fair.
yeah, but we also recently had to give the bad news that for a client in Eastern Tennessee, that the property that they wanted probably wasn't the right fit for them, and this was because it was entirely on a floodplain, and this was 2 weeks before the tropical storm came through and completely wiped out an area. So it's just a good
Wow.
reminder that honesty is the best policy.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. I would generally lean on the side of information overload when I'm buying a big property. So I think that is kind of a smart approach.
yeah.
So, what does science actually say about what makes a well-designed horse property?
Um, so there's, it's what I always tell clients that, get ready for 1,000 trade-off decisions. Rarely is there the perfect property. My job is to kind of identify what's good, what's bad, what are the trade-offs. Um, it starts with good soil. Is really important, because that's what makes it a lot easier to grow good grass pasture. If that's a primary source of forage for your horses. Um, a lot of it has to do with balancing human needs, horses needs, and the environment as well. So understanding the impacts of horse keeping on the land, soil erosion, protecting water quality, all of those things are particularly important. There are a lot of best management practices that can be applied to horse properties, that benefit both the health and well-being of the horses, but also of the land itself. And that's kind of why I liked the term sustainability, because while I'm an environmentalist at heart, balancing those needs with human needs, the financial aspect. Money doesn't grow on trees, and most of us don't have an unlimited amount of money to spend. So again, it's finding the balance between all of those different competing needs and wants.
When you talk about trade-offs, what are some common trade-offs that you see in kind of the projects that you're working on?
Um, so in terms of, you know, let's start big picture. When we're first looking at a property, um, perfectly flat. Yes, let's say you want to build your own house, a barn, an arena, and some pastures. Um, People don't appreciate arenas are really big footprints. And so if you just visualize, oh, this area looks flat. Um, Most people will underestimate how much of a elevation or a grade change there is across that arena pad. And when someone comes and flattens it, how much dirt has to be moved. Um, some topography and rolling hills is really good for horse health. And you see a lot of that, like being in North Carolina, the Charlottesville, Virginia is another big horse country area. And part of the reason for that is because they've got those rolling hills. And the best exercise for a horse is just to be out grazing, walking around, and a little bit of effort is good for them for their musculoskeletal development, etc. So you know, it's what's good for a horse's health and well-being versus how much is it going to cost to put a 100 by 200 arena on this property, etc. So those are some of the trade-offs that immediately come to mind. But it's never ending as you go from big picture down to the fine details. A lot of it has to do with you know orienting your barn. There's if you want good natural ventilation, there's a specific way to orient it. What's the prevailing wind directions has a lot to do with that. But do you want to be looking at the back of your barn from your house? So that's another example of a type of trade-off. So it's just identifying those and prioritizing what's more important.
Yeah. Are there any common design choices people make that seem smart but go against what science tells us is best for horses or the land?
So the one that comes to mind the most is the first thing that pops into my head is is more specific to barn design itself. Um, I'm a big advocate of designing a facility where a horse can be a horse. Um, and so there's a lot of good studies out, particularly, I mean, it's true everywhere, but it's particularly true in the US where the US barn is basically a bunch of 12 by 12 boxes strung together. And so, the typical 12 by 12 box stall. Um, it's very convenient for humans, not as natural for horses per se. Um, the common pushback that I get from advocating for more natural horse keeping is not only chore efficiency from a human standpoint, but also just the safety of the horse. But if you look at a lot of the studies, most of these come out of Europe. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what science says in terms of health and well-being of horses in terms of how they're housed, whether that has to do with um, their behavior, their aggressiveness, stereotypic behaviors and vices, etc. But also even, there's been some studies that look at group housing versus individual box stalls. And while those limited studies do say that yes, if there's the more horses are together in a herd, the more likely that you're going to have to call the vet and say my horse got kicked. That actually doesn't, in the studies that I've seen, that doesn't translate to, for the sport horse community, does not translate to any changes in train, downtime from being able to ride and train that horse. And so, when you hear a story of a horse being injured by another horse from a friend, or if it's happened to you, that's very powerful. And we, of course, want to protect our horses, just like we want to protect our families. But it's easier to see when a physical injury occurs than it is to understand. So those same studies, they will look at things like stress, cortisol levels, and other stress responses in horses that you can't just see when you look at a horse, but scientists and vets can measure these things. And so we try to bring that into our design, and that doesn't mean that for all of our clients we say get rid of stalls altogether and keep horses together as a herd. I'm a big advocate of, for most of our clients, let's do a mixture of both. So we create flexibility, whether that's a horse changes over time, or your herd changes over time, or your needs change over time. You don't have to reinvent the wheel with the design of your property. But and then I forgot. I was going to say something else, but I forgot where I was going to go next. So
No
I'll
worries.
stop there.
It'll come to you, I'm sure. Um, okay, so where do you often see conflict arise between convenience for people versus what's best for the horses or the land? Is that maybe it's the same answer you just gave. Does anything else come
Yeah,
to mind?
yeah. So this has a lot to do with again specific to barn design. Um, is humans want and what humans know because they're experiencing it themselves as comfortable is not necessarily what science says horses find comfortable. So, perfect example of that is um, is it cold outside to you? Maybe. Is it cold outside to the horse? Probably not. Drawing a blank on the technical term, but it has to get below the low 40s before a horse has to even expend energy to stay warm. Above from about 40 to 70 something degrees is the horse's this is perfect zone, so to speak. They you can't ask a horse, are you comfortable per se, but again, you can measure does this temperature require you to expend energy to maintain your internal body temperature. So for humans, it's a much higher temperature that's required and a much narrower temperature range that's required for our for us to not have to expend energy staying warm or cooling down. And so when we approach barn design, we intentionally separate human spaces from horse spaces, and then and design those a little bit differently because humans do. If if I'm out in the barn, I want it to be comfortable, but it's equally important that my horses are comfortable as well. And then just integrating the barn with the facility as a whole. From my background, and because we really got started with layout and planning, which necessitated getting into barn design, I I come at it from a let's design a barn that works with the land and the farm as a whole, rather than okay, here's what my barn is going to look like. How do I fit the rest of the property to fit that particular barn?
Okay, and would you say that when you design a property from scratch, if I were to walk or if any of us were to walk into that facility, would it be like, "Oh, Clay did this?" Like, is it noticeable the differences that you're doing?
Um, I don't think it's noticeable to the point of someone would say, "Oh, Clay did that," or "Sustainable Stables did that." I'm not an absolutist, and I don't think there's a one size fits all approach that's right for everybody. Um, a lot of this comes down, we do try to fit that. I'm not designing my farm; I'm designing my client's property, and so every project is unique and every project is different. So rather than putting my stamp on their property, I'm trying to fit their wants and needs. Um, that being said, we are working on a new line of barn design that's part of the conversation is making some things that hopefully are consistent, where you might recognize that it's a sustainable stables designed barn. But a lot of what we advocate for are things we learned from others, and so I don't want to take credit for that either, and steal my name from an idea or a concept that I learned from somebody else.
So if you were to design like this sustainable stables ideal barn, what would that look like? Like what are the some of the elements that might be kind of a signature to what you guys have learned from research and just your experience?
So the where I would start is what type of facility is this? Is this a sport horse facility? Is this a professional or a commercial facility where horses are going to be handled, ridden, trained regularly? Is there a barn manager or employees to do some of the heavy lifting? Or is this your personal hobby farm where you work from 9 to 5, you get home at 5:30, you want to hang out with your horses and enjoy them, and you don't want to spend 5:30 to the dark just catching them from the pasture and bringing them into the stalls. So those are examples of very different design. But we always advocate for. I think the most important part of a facility is oftentimes not the barn. but some type of all-weather turnout area, um, dry lot, or runs, because most people don't have the amount of acreage that you would ideally want for the number of horses you have in your property. That's the rule, not the exception. And so a place where they can be turned out to have more movement than they might have in a stall, but not overgrazing pastures, or being able to manage. There's so many health issues with today, modern improved pasture grasses, which is could be its own podcast or series of podcasts in and of itself. Um, Starting there and then connecting that to the barn and to the pastures. And so it's all an integrated system that works together. And to the extent, if it's the right for most of our clients, it does work. That to some degree, the ability for horses to have freedom of movement between those areas. Um, More so for the hobby farm, where you don't want to necessarily have to go out and move each individual horse from a stall to a pasture. Where if it's a sport horse or a commercial facility, you might have paid help to do that. And also, as someone who spent hours running around a 30-acre pasture to try to catch my horse to ride them, I understand that the ability to just go to a stall and saddle up and ride is good. So it's a balancing act, which again, there's not a one size fits all approach to that. It's very context specific.
Can you tell me more about this all-weather turnout? What does that actually look like?
So, I mean, a dry lot would be the most common term. So, if you're keeping your horses together as a group, it would be a group dry lot, or a couple if you wanted to manage multiple bands or multiple herds of horses on your property, or it could just be an individual run off of a stall. Those would be the two most common that you see. And so, and again, we provide suggestions, but I'm not, ultimately we're designing someone else's property. If you're land limited and the horses are being ridden and handled regularly, that's the one exception where you might not have as integrated and connected of a system with all weather turnout. But some form of runs is always a good idea. At the very least, Dutch doors off of stalls, so that heaven forbid there's a fire, you don't have to go into the barn to get the horses out. Um, those are some things that are, we're going to push back a little bit if someone says no the first time we suggest that.
Yeah. I really like that. Okay, so I know you've said don't put the cart before the horse before. What do you mean by what do you mean by that when it comes to farm planning?
Um, so I think that was actually I think I spoke on that a little bit earlier, where we're big advocates of let the land and the rest of the property dictate the barn design, versus starting with this is what my barn's going to look like and trying to fit that into the landscape, and then figuring out how you're going to connect that or integrate that with the rest of the facility, for horse health and well-being, for chore efficiency, etc. So we love designing barns. We love designing really nice, pretty, beautiful barns. But that's never going to be the first part of the conversation, nor do I think it should be. The other part of that is barns are expensive. And I have a library of photos of beautiful barns surrounded by seas of dirt and mud, because probably ran out of your budget and put too much of it into the barn itself, and therefore didn't have money or room in the budget to do the rest of the facility correctly. So it's finding those balances. And again, we love designing beautiful barns, but that's not necessarily the most important or the first thing that we focus on.
Yeah. Madeline is wondering if are there some land red flags that one should automatically avoid?
Yeah, so again, it depends. But so things that we always look at early on are, what are the soils on your property and what's the topography on your property? and understanding what you want to do with that property. Um, so with soils, where we start because it's easy and anyone can access it, USDA Web Soil Survey. You can just Google that, you'll find it online, and you'll find your property, and you can find out, I don't know, 2 to 300 different ratings for the soils on your property. Is it suitable for houses? If it's in barns from a foundation standpoint, how likely is mud going to be an issue? Um, and understanding that takes a little bit of experience. One of the first things you'll see when you're looking at soils, are they well drained? Are they poorly drained soils? That doesn't necessarily in of itself mean that you are or not going to have issues with mud. Um, the thing that we look at to start, there's two ratings that are really important there. One is the hydric rating of soils. And so that is a measure of, are the soils wet most or all of the time? So a wetland would be a classic example of hydric soils. We see those not as commonly, but that's definitely, if your entire property is a wetland, I would not recommend purchasing that property, or if there's too many hydric rating. Depth to groundwater is another important one. But when it comes to mud, the thing that people don't necessarily know to look at is what's called the hydrologic soil group. It's just a rating A through D. So every soil is rated A, B, C, or D. A hydrologic soil group A soil. This is a little bit of an oversimplification, but think of a sand desert. You're not going to. It's very typically dominated by sandy soils. You're not going to have a lot of issues with mud, but it's going to be hard to grow good grass on that property. On the other end of the stream is hydrologic soil group D soils. And you might go see this property in the spring or the summer. There hasn't been much rain for a month and it feels perfectly dry. And then you buy that property and you get a couple of weeks of rain and it turns into mud, especially when you start turning horses out on the property. And so that gets at some other factors that impact how the propensity of a certain property for mud. Hydrologic soil group D soils typically have one of two things. One is a clay layer at a shallow level. And so that when it starts to get wet, clay expands, it becomes very impermeable, meaning that water has nowhere to go. So it pools, and then you've got wet soils, and you turn horses out there, and that quickly turns into mud. So, if I was picking the perfect property, I'd want to see a hydrologic soil group B or C. That's kind of again, speaking of trade-offs, mud's not going to be extreme, but it's still going to be an issue. But you can also, it's easier to grow good grass because if it's just purely sand does not hold on to nutrients very well. And so, that's another thing when we're looking at pasture management. Even if you get a soil test and say, okay, I need to apply this much lime or this much nutrients, when you apply it to sandy soils, it does not stick to the soil, and your first couple rainfalls, half of it washes off to the nearest creek. It creates its own. That's a waste of money. That's just money flowing away from your property, and B, that's creating a host of environmental issues that we want to avoid. So that's one, soils, and then topography is the other one. Obviously, in certain regions, it's hard to find flat land. In fact, that property in Tennessee was one example where it's in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Not a lot of flat land around there. Where there is flat land, it tends to be in those floodplains that are next to rivers. That matters more if someone says, I want to do a 200 by 300 arena versus someone who doesn't want an arena at all on their property in terms of topography. So again, it's those are the two of the things that we tend to focus on. And then beyond the environmental aspects, just understanding, are there any easements on the property is incredibly important. A big issue that you run into a lot, always know if your property is going to be on septic, know if your soil is going to perk before you buy that property. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we did septic system design. This was out in Southern California, and it was not uncommon for us to have a client who just purchased their dream property and had already paid an architect to design these beautiful house plans, and there was not any area on that property where it could get approved for a septic system, and you had to be a dream killer. There are better options today than there were 20 years ago with ways to deal with that, but it means more money. Um, so that would be another thing to look at. And um, you know, if you have the time, I'd always recommend what's the county or the town or the state planning is. I had a client recently who we discovered they're going to be putting that the highway is going to be, not now, but in 10 years, the plan was there's going to be a highway running right next to your property. So there, it's a lot. And again, it can be overwhelming, but those are some of the big things that we focus on.
Yeah. When you use did you say if the soil is gonna perk?
Yep.
What does that mean?
So for septic systems, conventional is you flush the toilet, it goes into a septic system, and then the leachate then goes into a series of buried pipes, and then just basically flows into the ground from there. Um, some soils, water, sewage waste, what have you, flow through that soil better than others. And there's a point at which they will not give you a septic permit because your soils will not allow for that effluent to flow into the ground. And obviously, then the volume, at some point soon, you'll flush the toilet and there's nowhere for the water to go. So percolation is the rate of movement of a fluid through and down into the soil.
Okay. Got it. I'm learning so much. One thing is I feel like they've really mislabeled the soils with the A to D. A is very misleading. I would think that that was the real winner, but seems like it can be
Yeah,
problematic.
yeah, that's true. I guess that's how we were raised, right? A is always best.
Yeah. Yeah, they could have done a different scale.
Well, I'm a middle child, so the middle is always best in my book.
Fair, fair. So it does make sense for you that the
Yeah,
BC is
I'm
really
very
the
much a Goldilocks and the Three Bears type of person.
well, you found the perfect career for that. I love that. Okay, so how do you approach a property where the barn or layout is already built, but it doesn't really work?
So that's a great question. I mean, the short answer is to do the best you can. And so we do get a lot of. I mean, it's not. I would say if someone says there's an old barn on the property, let's just say, if I had to bet, I'm going to bet that it's probably not going to make sense to try to make that barn work for you. Oftentimes, it's just not structurally sound, not the right barn, and to fix it is going to cost more than just to start fresh. But that's where speaking with an expert, I think is time and money well spent to understand that. But that's one of those things that's very much case by case, context specific. What is the problem, and what is your goal, and how do we do the best we can to kind of achieve those? So oftentimes it might mean just to use that. It's kind of one of those questions where you need a little bit more specific. What's the issue that's not working to give a good answer, but just to continue with the idea of there's a barn on our property. Maybe it'll be better to just fix it up. If the answer is no, it doesn't mean that thing it's not valuable. It might be a perfect to store hay, bedding, etc. Just not perfect for horses and tack room and all of that stuff that you might want.
What are some practical ways to reduce the environmental impact of a horse property?
So again, this gets number one, that dry lot, that all weather turnout. Number one, because they've done studies where they put GPS trackers on horses, and they don't need a ton of space to move. They'll just move in smaller circles. You see, I think Rutgers is one that I'm recalling where up there in the Northeast you get a lot of snow, and so that's also a limiting factor to where they can move. But in the summer, when they had access to the entire property, they thought that horses would move more. Where in the winter they're confined either to their stalls or if they had access to a dry lot. Uh, they moved pretty much the same amount. They just again moved in smaller circles.
Okay. Yeah, it's really I mean, it is really cool that, like, all these design decisions you're making are based off of science and research, whereas, I mean, my understanding would have been, like, what looks the best or what
Yeah,
like, like which I think is probably a lot of people go into it with that thought process, but there are so many elements here to be taking into account.
yeah. I mean, this couple things again. This is if this is your personal use farm, I cringe to uh, when people look at a commercial facility and say, "Oh, that where they've clearly uh, spent a lot of money to make that facility look really nice," and think that that's the standard that they should apply to their property, um, because it's just different. And so, again, every project is unique. There are some generalities. You can put things into small groups, but there's a lot of differences that are very important. And then the other thing is, if you ever, Facebook, there's some really great Facebook groups out there, and you'll see people ask for advice about, here's what I'm thinking for a layout for my property. What do you think? And what I wanted to respond with, although I know better, is to say, well, I need a whole lot more information than you're providing to give an informed answer. And so when I see other people giving answers, I know that that might be a good answer, or it might be the exact opposite of what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah, it is hard hard in those situations.
Yeah.
Uh, do you have any like projects that come to mind for you as like either both or on like the sport horse side or on the more like backyard barn side of just like that project really stood out to you as from start to finish it was really executed how you wanted it to and some elements of that that were really satisfying for you as an expert?
Um, you know, I don't want to say that there's one that checks all of the boxes. Um, there are projects that, if I could take bits and pieces of each one and put them all together, it would get close to, checking all the boxes of what I would call the perfect property. Um, on the hobby farm side of things, we it's just 5 acre property, 2 horses. I think there's 2 acres of pasture to work with, but we designed it in a very efficient way. Where we added a dry lot to the back of the barn, added and extended that as a laneway to connect to the pasture, which is just big rectangle that we subdivided into 4 smaller pastures to allow for rotational grazing. And they loved it. Unfortunately, after 2 or 3 years of living on the property, I think one of the owners' mother was sick and they had to move. But I remember getting an email that said, "Clay, people are fighting us to buy this property because it's set up exactly how a hobby farm you would want." And so that was a proud moment for me. Um, we've been fortunate to work with a handful of nonprofit organizations that use horses for therapy. The one that comes to mind is kids who have experienced some form of trauma. And so, that's part of why I got into this. I like the idea of good land stewardship, but I think anyone in the horse industry has to have a love of horses and understand how amazing and powerful they are as animals, irrespective of whether you ride them or just are around them. And so, you know, having nothing to do with good design, just being involved with projects like that, where they're using horses and hearing the stories of my daughter experienced some traumatic trauma that no parent would ever want their kid to experience. They haven't been able to talk about it with anyone, and I hear them whispering their story to the horse. I mean, it doesn't get better than that. So, which again gets to the whole point of sustainability is environment's really important, but it's about community, and that's human community, and horses have a big part in that as well.
Yeah, horses are incredible.
Yeah.
We're so lucky to have them. Are there any specific features like composting systems, water catchment, or pasture rotation that you recommend often?
All of them. So, uh, so let's start with pasture rotation. It's a great strategy because, like I said earlier, in best case scenario, you want 2 acres per horse. In a lot of parts of the country, it's more than that. And rarely do you have that much land. Um, this, I think people be helpful for anyone that's considering buying a property. Again, this can vary quite a bit, but as a general rule of thumb, if someone says they're buying a 40-acre property and I haven't seen anything about it, I'm going to guess that you could get max 10 acres of pasture out of it. And people don't realize that. There's setbacks, there's roads, there's other improvements, there's trees, there's a lot of things like that. So even if you think you're buying enough land, until you've actually done the planning and implemented that plan, you probably don't have an idea of how much pasture you're going to get. So point being is we all wish we had more. Most of us wish we had more pasture than we did. So that's where rotational grazing comes in. It's very, very, uh, it's a really good practice to get the most forage out of the land that you have. It's designed to mimic the relationship between grasses and grazers, and the evolution of that relationship over millions of years. The classic example is buffaloes. They as they're roaming and they're coming through a specific area, they are grazing. Every blade of every edible piece of forage is eaten, and then they move on and they don't come back for a long time. And that process is actually very that symbiotic relationship is really good for pastures. And so we're trying to mimic that. One of the things that I've gotten kind of into recently is regenerative agriculture. So um, you now that's a buzz term that I think you know probably a lot of horse owners have heard. You see it really being applied and applied effectively more for traditional livestock cattle in the U.S. Um, I bring this up because some of the true experts in regenerative agriculture, where rotational grazing is critically important, studies show that you need about 30 paddocks to rotate between to maximize the benefits of rotational grazing. And I have yet to see any horse owner that's rotating between 10, let alone 30. The best you could do is 4. So rotational grazing is great. It's unlikely that you're going to utilize it to its full effect, but some is better than none. So again, that will enable you to get more forage out of the land that you have than you would from continuous grazing. Um, Composting, again, I could talk to you about as a chemist. I could talk to you about that for hours. I actually love that topic. Incredibly, it horses generate a lot of poop and a lot of urine, and if your horses are stalled at all, a lot of bedding as well. That's a lot of waste, and it's actually can be converted into a very valuable resource. And composting is the best way to do that. The composting process actually does a number of things that are very beneficial. Uh, Nitrogen in particular. Um, you know, until I was uh, very far along as a chemist, when you hear nitrogen, you see all nitrogen's the same. That's not true. And so there's it converts the nitrogen in in that mix into a much more stable form. That is going to be when you apply it, it's going to go where you want it to go, which is to the root of that grass. Versus if you spread raw manure, you're going to get a lot more off gassing of that nitrogen, uh, and it's just going to literally vaporize and off gas into the atmosphere. And so that's one benefit of composting. Killing worms and other parasites through the heating process is another benefit. That is a big challenge with any horse owner, is parasite control, and you know deworming, parasites are becoming resistant to those things, and so we don't want to be spreading around via spreading manure and reinfecting our horses. And so that's another benefit. And then killing weed seeds, etc. So it's totally worth. It's awesome to do, but it does require work. There are some easier ways to do it, but easy doesn't mean truly easy. It's still work to do it right, but it's time well spent. So for people who are willing to put in the work, uh, absolutely do it. If you're not, if you don't want to or don't have the ability to, then finding someone who will pick up the manure, uh, a local landscaper, etc., who will put that resource to good use is the next best thing. So yeah, but it's challenging because again with the bedding, that's the high carbon, and it's hard to get all the bedding out of the manure, and that can inhibit the composting process because that's the food for the microbes that are doing the composting, and they want their food to be right. They're very picky, and so one way as a chemist you describe that is the amount of carbon relative to nitrogen, and managing that is a challenge on horse properties.
Got it. Okay. How do you help people plan when their dream property isn't feasible all at once? What does smart phasing look like?
So yeah, we do a lot of that. It starts with that good planning is always important, but it's even more important if you want to phase things. Because once you've built a barn or an arena, you don't want to move it. And so understanding phasing just in terms of having a vision for what you want it to be and coming up with a plan to create that vision. I don't know how to do it without a plan. And then another benefit of it is enabling you to think through what's the most, from a budgetary standpoint, what's the most cost effective way to implement this plan. Let's say you have a 3-phase plan, and phase 3 is an arena or a bigger barn. You might want to go ahead and grade that pad for that in phase 1 because you need to do the grading to do part of phase 1 or phase 2. A lot of the cost of that is just mobilizing the equipment needed to do that work, and so that's where coming up with a plan and thinking through what's the most cost effective way to implement that plan over time and putting the thought in at the beginning will enable you to successfully um, you know bring that phased plan to life over time.
Yeah. Okay. Are there any design elements that you can DIY versus ones where it's really worth calling in a pro?
uh so yes, you know uh DIY will depend a lot on what skill set you have. When you think about a barn or any other structure, it's very important that it's structurally sound. So unless you feel very confident that you know how to not just build a barn that looks nice, but is going to withstand, the worst that Mother Nature can throw at you, I would recommend hiring a professional for that. Another one that comes to mind where I would recommend hiring a professional is arena design. And if you're going to do anything other than literally the most bare bones area that you designate, I'm going to ride here. Uh, it's there's arenas are one of those things where there's not a good. I hate to say this as a middle child. There's not a good middle of the road approach. I mean, let's take the fancy footing amendments, the fibers, et cetera, out of the equation. Just talking about it being properly graded and creating a good foundation, sub base base. Only way to do that is to have the right equipment, and that's that's hundreds of thousands. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. We're talking about the grading equipment, the laser grading attachments that go along with it, etc. DIY, if you're willing to put in the sweat equity, fencing is not rocket science. Just doing some type of all weather turnout. Another name, another concept for all weather turnout is just a sacrifice area, which some people use that and dry lot interchangeably. I tend to think of a dry lot as designing it to, you're investing time, money, and design energy into knowing that even when it rains, it's going to, there's not going to be mud. Sacrifice area is just, I'm going to sacrifice this part of my land uh, and know that I'm not going to be able to grow good grass. This area is going to get muddy, but it's going to enable the rest of the property to look and perform the way that I want it to. So those are two that come to mind.
Yeah, those are great. Okay, so we're already here almost on the hour.
Oh, wow.
This has been so immensely valuable, and really just appreciate you sharing such in-depth knowledge with us, Clay. Before I let you go, I would love to learn from you, what's your favorite part of the design process, if you have one?
Um, I'm incredibly lucky. I mean, almost universally, everyone that hires us, they're hiring us to fulfill a lifelong dream. And being able to be a part of that is incredibly awesome. So it's just the relationships, from start to finish, where someone comes so excited. 9 times out of 10, just like any relationship, there's a period where, more often than not, through no fault of anyone's, what started as a dream is turning into, there's some bumps on the road, so to speak. But you get through those, and then, opportunities I have to go back and visit a property, but more importantly, visit a client, a couple of years down the road, and seeing them enjoy what we've, planned, designed, built as a team, which the client is equally important part of that team, is very rewarding. So it's I as a shy person who's not going to walk up to someone at a bar or in a room and just start a conversation and get to know them. This is my opportunity to scratch my itch of connecting with people. So that's what I love about it.
That's awesome. It really feels like you
Mhm.
found your perfect pursuit in life. It's awesome to see that.
Thank you.
Uh, so Clay, where can people learn more about sustainable stables or get in touch with you?
Sure. So, like most people, we have a website. And so I'd start there. It's just sustainablestables.com. You can reach out to me through the website contact form, or just email me directly at clay@sustainablestables.com. That's probably the easiest way. We're on Facebook and Instagram and things like that. Although social media is one of those things that I wish I had more time. It's usually the last thing that gets done. But the website would be the best way to start that.
Perfect. Well, I'm sure many Rad IQ members are going to be reaching out after this. And this has been just so wonderful. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Clay, and everybody who submitted questions. Thank you for doing so.
And
And have a
if I
wonderful
could
evening, everyone.
make one more quick request.
Oh, yes, please
So
do.
even if you don't want to reach out to hire me, I enjoy learning as much as I enjoy teaching. So if anyone wants to share a study, an article, an experience, a story with me, irrespective of whether they're wanting to hire us for our services, please don't hesitate to reach out.
Amazing.
Mhm.
That's awesome. An awesome insert. And thank you again, Clay. And we'll talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Kinsey. I appreciate having the opportunity to be on this awesome podcast. You guys do a great job.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
Well, have a great evening.
All
Talk
right,
to you later.
right there.
Okay. Thanks so much, Clay.
Wow, it's a good sign when you said it's 5 till the hour. I was like, I thought we were maybe halfway through. So.
I know. We get that a lot. That means it's okay as long